Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Restrung podcast. My name is Sander Vika. Welcome back. It's been a few weeks since we've had one of these, and if anything, we've just not only been catching our breath, reflecting on Australia and what was a great start to the tennis year, but also what's happened since and some really wonderful and fabulous tennis being played across the Middle East, with in particular really Doha, because that's where the stars really flocked towards. It would be remiss without us immediately going towards the big story of Doha and really this season so far, and it's been the way that Carlos Alcaraz just seems to have completely embraced this season, embraced what was at times a bit difficult last season, so 2025. And I mean, he's well on his way to setting the tennis world again on fire. And I just want to talk about what we're seeing, because he's won Australia, he's won Doha, which, albeit not a Masters 1000, but certainly right up there as far as non-big tournaments, if you will, go. He is 12-0 on the season, and not just the fact that he's 12-0, but in the way that he's gone about it. I think there's stats, and then a lot of athletes, regardless of the sport, but tennis is very much one of them. There's the eye test, and certainly, even if you weren't looking at any stats whatsoever, just the way that Alcaraz has been showing up, the way he's been hitting the ball, the freeness and the confidence that he's playing his tennis at the moment is beautiful to see. It emulates really what the greats of our sport have in the past. And obviously with Alcaraz, objectively speaking, because there are a lot of good players out there, and on his day, perhaps the best in Yannick Sinner, but there's just a way to Alcaraz's game style that he's adopted over the years. And it's the same sort of thing that's made Roger Federer age so well and continue to age so well whenever people talk about him. It's the way that he played the game. And it's the way that Alcaraz embodies, in particular, all of the top three. It's the way that he's able to take that forehand and seemingly out of nowhere inject pace either up to the line or cross court. It's the way that he can redirect balls specifically on the backhand up the line at will. And he's just baiting you into it. And then just to top it all off, you may not think this, because it may not be just as apparent as it was for Nadal, but his weight of shot, you talk to anybody in the game and you get onto one of those levels, one of those court eye views, you can just see the amount of work, the amount of RPM he is putting on those shots. Oh, and by the way, then you add in the variance that he brings to a rally, the slice, the half volleys, and of course the drop shot. And it just makes for such an easy watch. And then obviously you put that together with retrieving skills that Nadal and Djokovic and hell, even Murray pretty much perfected over the years. And it's like, who can beat him? And really the only answer is Yannick Sinner. But it has to be one of Sinner's best days, and perhaps a slightly off-kilter Alcaraz. Because ultimately, I think this is probably the best we've seen of Alcaraz. And I mean, some of the stuff he was pulling out back in 2022, 2023, where he perhaps didn't quite have the serve that he now has, some of the additional variants. He had this freedom that he played with, where he wasn't potentially sometimes not second guessing himself, but not allowing himself to play with freedom. And that's the other thing that makes all this so much more impressive, is that he rarely, and I mean really rarely, chooses the wrong shot nowadays. Back in the first few years when he broke onto the scene, every now and again, he'd throw in a few shots that, had he picked the right one, would have ended the rally much sooner and with much more consequence. But now, that's rarely the case. There's such clarity of thought, especially when he's in this kind of mood. And that perhaps is the most impressive, because when you're playing these great players on these big stages. As we talk about a lot of times, it's the mental side of things. It's the execution. It's having a game plan and then executing it. Not just executing it, but executing it with a precision and an accuracy and a confidence. It's the reason why a lot of these players already have won a set before they even get onto the court. And it's these little edges, or, well, quite big head starts, which shows why it's so difficult to beat these players. Right? With Djokovic, it was his mental strength. And before we digress too much, it's the reason why Federer struggled against Djokovic for the better part of a decade, of the last decade that they played, particularly in the biggest matches, because Federer knew he had to execute. He had to serve nigh on perfectly, and his backhand had to be impenetrable. Now you shift that over to Carlos Alcaraz. Where do you see gaps? Where do you see gaps in his game that you're going to exploit? Well, unless you're Yannick Sinner and you can hit lines for 3 hours, you're most likely going to struggle because it's very difficult to outrun him, to outlast him. It's now difficult to outserve him, to outreturn him, to outmaneuver, out drop shot him. So unless you're Yannick Sinner and you can hit almost through him, it's difficult. And just before we look forward to Indian Wells and what all this means, some stat that really kind of encapsulated it for me was in 12 matches, including a Grand Slam, which is a minimum of 21 sets. He's dropped 4 sets, and 2 of those were against Zverev, one of them against Djokovic in the final, at a place where Djokovic had never lost a match in a final before. Like, those are, even by some of the more incredible starts to a season, incredible numbers. So for Alcaraz, if we look to Indian Wells now, it's a place where he's had success in a lot of ways, kind of his breakthrough tournament in 2022. The first real proper glimpse that we had of him against the biggest names in the sport and fighting toe-to-toe with them. And we just lost out to Nadal in what was a hell of a 3-setter. Then he goes on to win it twice before losing to Draper last year in what was a somewhat slow start to his campaign. But it's logical because it's a very clay-like hard court. It's quite gritty. Ball sits up, gives a little bit more time, and it becomes extremely difficult to, well, even more difficult to hit through him when he's won it already twice, as well as we've said, which only makes that comfort level go up even more. And it becomes a question of who can beat him, who is in a position to really take it to him. And at the moment, you gotta think it's still Sinner, because the guy's only lost 2 matches on hard courts now in the last however long. Is it a year? Is it a year? Almost a year? You know, it's quite funny because lots of people all of a sudden are discounting Sinner. And it just kind of shows the bandwagon kind of nature to sport, even in tennis, right? Because as we saw with the big 3, they had surges where they would find something. More than anything else, it would unlock a confidence in them. And that's exactly what Alcaraz is experiencing at the moment. That can go away very quickly, very quickly. We're recording this at the time of the qualifying rounds, so the draws have not come out yet. I think you'd be a fool to count on anything other than a Alcaraz Sinner final. And if you're Sinner, the thing people continue to forget about is you can play with just as much freedom, if not more freedom, than Alcaraz. Why? Because last year, you were out for about 3 months. Like, after the Australian Open, he earned no points in 3 months, over 3 months. And if you think 3 months worth of points could easily put him back to number 1 with some good results. And that obviously is a spot of luxury. You got to wonder about, looking at the rest of the field, you got to wonder about, what about Novak? Tied for the most titles with Roger. Won it in, was it 2008, 11, 15, 20? It's always gone well here. But what's his physical shape looking like? obviously withdrew from Doha from the Middle Eastern tournaments, citing fatigue. What does his preparation look like? What does his energy levels look like? And beyond that, you've still got the likes of Zverev, the likes of Medvedev, the likes of Felix Auger-Aliassime, and a returning Jack Draper, all who are playing some pretty good tennis in the last couple of weeks. And that's where we'll leave it for now. We've got a few shows lined up throughout the Indian Wells and Miami tournaments each. We've also got a few features that'll be released throughout the upcoming couple of 2-3 weeks here. So do make sure you check out those as and when they're added to the channel. This has been Sander Vika. You've been listening to Restrung. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.